knows Arabic understand that there is a level of authority between al-alim wal-khabir. The alim is the true knowledge. This is the essence of knowledge. And al-khabir is the specialist. We can ask him for advice, but at the end of the day, the true scholar is the one knowing the texts. And my point is, it's exactly here that we have a problem, that we need a shift, that we need a radical reform in the way we deal with the texts in the light of the context, and in the way we deal with the context in the light of the text. So we need to have something which is a shift in the center of gravity to welcome all the other sciences at the same level of authority when it comes to applied ethics. This is a liberation process. This is why you have as a subtitle Islamic Ethics and Liberation. Is to liberate ourselves from this adapting our interpretations of the text to the world which is changing, but to come back to a more balanced approach to help us in the light of the text to change the world, to transform the world for the better. So this is something which is, this is why in the book, the first half of the book is really about the fundamentals. And this is quite important for me, because I'm also talking from within. And I want the Muslim scholars and also the Muslims, but also my fellow citizens, the non-Muslims, to understand I am speaking from within a tradition. And this tradition is rich. And this tradition is calling you to seek knowledge, to understand that you cannot just speak about Muslims, say, oh, we are waiting for you to be modern. Thinking something which is completely wrong, that there is a difference. Modern is about movement and tradition is about being static, a status quo. Tell me, show me one tradition which is a static tradition. It doesn't exist. A tradition is moving, always moving, if you understand the intrinsic dynamic of the tradition, if you come back to the sources and the fundamentals. So this is why, for me, it was very important to come to this understanding and say, this is where we have to go. It's all about usul al-fiqh. And about usul al-fiqh, trying to come back to the tradition, understanding that the scholars of the past, they were able, for one scholar, he was able to be, at the same time, very, very well versed in anything which has to do with the Islamic legal tradition, but sometimes he can be a physician, a medical doctor, knowing about the context. Or, for example, Abu Hanifa being able at the same time to know about the scriptural sources and to be a trader, and coming with very creative rules in the field he knew, which is trading. Why? Because he knew that if you want to come to something which is effective, to reform that field, you should be knowledgeable. You should know what is happening there. If you don't, by definition, you just run after the changes, and you don't have a vision for the future. And this is where my point, and this is what I want now to push some of the Muslim scholars, the text, and scholars of the context. And by the way, scholars of the context should not only be Muslims. They should be experts, specialized in the field. And this is why we come together and we try to work together on specific fields. And in the last book, I took some examples. The first one, when we are very good, and this is why it's very important to acknowledge the fact that we are doing, and we are at the forefront, and the Muslim scholars are at the forefront in specific fields. One which is very good is in the medical science, where you have fatwa, legal opinion, at the highest level of expertise. Why? Because the Muslim scholars are sitting with medical doctors, because they know that they don't know. They know that they are limited in their knowledge. So we have to come with this, which is very important. But we should do exactly the same in economy. We should do exactly the same in sociology, in anything which has to do with power, for example. When you speak about authority in the time of the nation state, it's not the same as today. To come and to duplicate, not understanding that the principles are universal, but the models are historical, and they are changing. One of the main problems that we have is to confuse between historical models and universal principles, and to think that by duplicating a historical model, we are faithful to a universal principle. It could be exactly the opposite. By duplicating a historical model, you are unfaithful to a principle, if you understand the very meaning of what we are talking about. So this is why we need to do this with women, in arts, for example. But once again, it's not only to speak about Western Muslims here, it's crossing the board. It's with Muslims in the Muslim majority countries and us. This is where the dialogue, the true dialogue, should start. And not start, but in fact be deepened. This is why we have to work together. So this is why I think that we need a radical reform. And some of the Muslim scholars, just to end, were telling me, no, we are doing it already. I say, no. You want to avoid the radical reform by telling us that by asking some advisors to scholars of the context, you will get the point. No, it's not enough. You have to share authority, not to ask for reports. Shared authority in anything which has to do with applied ethics. So it's important. And the second point, which is important, I am now very much against anything which has to do with, labels and things like Islamic economy, Islamic finance, Islamic medicine. And I just heard, I never knew that I said that once, that Paul Berman is saying, Tariq Ramadan is speaking about Islamic biology. Welcome to the world of what they know you say, or they know you think, without having saying it once. But the point for me is very important. There is nothing like this. There is Islamic ethics in economy, Islamic ethics in medical sciences. And this is very important. The nuance is very important. Why? Because we acknowledge the fact there is a science here that we are sharing, that we cannot just come and say, in the name of Islam, this is the way you are doing this science, or you are practicing this. No, this science has rules that you have to respect. And then you come with your ethics. And by having this in mind, you can take from Christian ethics, Protestant ethics, Catholic ethics, Jewish ethics, atheist or agnostic ethics, while we can share ethics when we understand that there is a field which is not bound by the religious thought, but we can direct our understanding, because ethics, at the end of the day, is all about ends. It's good to know, it's very important to know why we want to know and what we are doing out of this knowledge. So this is the very important question. So for me today is very much to push the contemporary Islamic thought towards this radical reform in the way we deal with the text, with the scholars, and with the surrounding partners in this, understanding by this that you should not be a Muslim to get a very deep expertise in any field, but you should be involved in the discussion when it comes to applied ethics in our contemporary world. Thank you.
My remarks are going to be in two phases. My opening remarks, which I'll make now, will deal with the issue of Islamic reform. In our conversation, I will deal specifically with Professor Ramadan and some of the ideas that he's expressed here, but also in other contexts that deal with reform. To contextualize the whole question of reform in Islam, and then the particular perspective that Tariq Ramadan takes, I think it's important to realize that Muslims, like all believers, face a certain crossroads, and that is what students of all world religions know, that at certain points in history, and it's varied for Protestants, Jews, Catholics, etc., believers are faced with how does one square, if you will, the classical tradition with the new demands of modernity and post-modernity. And what does that mean in terms of faith and reinterpretation of faith, whether it's about law, doctrine / dogma, etc., also ritual. I think it's important at the outset to say that there are those who question whether or not there is a possibility of reform in Islam, and if so, where are the reformers? And they're clearly out there. But again, that's something you'd have to read about. You're not going to see a lot of that coverage, for example, in the popular media. But reformers today in the Muslim world are like reformers in Roman Catholicism. And I'll use the example of Roman Catholicism at times because I see a tremendous parallel, and also because we're at Georgetown. Despite the fact that I asked a friend once what a leader of an organization in another faith thought of Georgetown, and the first response of that leader was, too many Catholics. I thought that was kind of interesting for a Catholic institution. But in any case, when you look at reform in Roman Catholicism, which came far later than much of mainstream Protestantism, and what you see is a vanguard of theologians in the first part of the 20th century, who ultimately their ideas come to fruition in Vatican II. But in the early part of the 20th century, these were people who were a vanguard. They were regarded by much of the religious establishment as extreme and dangerous. They were regarded